If you listen to music, I'll bet you've got speakers something like this around. Well, today we're going to take those speakers and make these speakers out of it. Hello everyone, Colin Canet here for Woodwork Web. That's our project today. We've taken some old computer speakers. You can also connect them to your iPad, your iPod. With the right adapter, you can even put your phones, plug your phone into them. And we're going to take the workings out of them and build some beautiful little wooden boxes to really make them stand out. So stick around and watch how we go about it. So let's get started on this build. Here's the original speakers that we have here, so we'll need to take those apart. Now there's not much to these, just 4 screws. Now this one is a bit more complex because it has a little bit of a circuit board in here, and the circuit board connects to the speaker, and also there's some controls. There's an off-on switch and a volume switch on here, and there's a little LED that shows that it's on. So I'm going to be desoldering this one as well. Now we have the big bandsaw set up. And this wood measures just a little bit shy of 1 inch, so I'm going to cut it down the middle because I want to use 3/8 of an inch sides and tops on our speaker box. So let's go ahead and cut that. And now we need to take the boards that we just cut and plane them to the proper width. Now we need to come up with the size for this little wooden speaker box enclosure. The original box is a little bit under 3 inches wide by 7 inches high. And I'm not sure the height, I think it's about, or the width, I think it's about 4 inches in this area in here. So, but we need to make our speaker box. We're going to make it about the same size, but I think we're woodworkers. We want to make it, we don't just want to make a wooden box, we want to make it look a little bit special. So in this case, we'll make a box that looks like this. This is the outside. Then we'll have the 2 panels, the outside gables come down like that, and the bottom will be inset like that, and the top inset like that. But this area here that's going to contain the speakers, I think we're going to make it look like it's a little bit floating. And what we'll do is we'll cut a rabbet into that board so it will look like this. It'll look like it's floating in there, and this area in here between these two, this will be sort of like a darker space or a black space, and that's what will help make it look like it's floating. So with all of that, I think we can do this. We'll check the sizes, but I think we can go 3 inches and certainly 7 inches for the height is going to be fine. And we'll have to look at the little circuit board to make sure we get the depth. And I'll do that when we start having to cut the sizes of the gables here. So let's get started on cutting some of that wood up. Okay, I checked the width of the board that we need to cut, and it's exactly 4 inches. So I've set that up. I've set the blade height to be about a 1/2 tooth above the material, and we're ready to start cutting. now we're going to cut our boards to length, and I want them all to be exactly the same length, so I've put a stop in there, I've pushed the saw down, locked it, and then set that distance up. So when you're cutting like this, you need to make sure that you leave the blade down until it stops after each cut. So there's our box with the four sides, the top and the bottom, and both sides. But what we need to do, because we want to put this floating area in the middle where the speaker is going to go, we need to, before we assemble this, we need to cut slots. And I've been experimenting with some different widths here and some associated rabbets to fit into it, and this is essentially what we want to look like. So this will be the front. This is what you would be looking at here on the front, and this would be sort of this side. So that's what we need to look for. And there's the 16th bar, and you can see that it's just right at the very tip of the blade. In fact, the blade might even be just a tiny bit high, and that's fine. Now I'm going to use the 8th, and you can see how it just fits snugly behind there. So a very quick, easy way of measuring distances with these little measuring bars. Now I need to measure the stop and the start. So where the blade starts is right about here, and where it exits is right about here. Now I need to mark that on this tape because remember we need to do some stops and starts. And I'm going to give a little bit of leeway, so there's the start and the stop will be back there just a little bit. So first of all, we're going to run through our tops and bottoms. Now we're going to run our sides. And there's, I'm holding it, and there's our little box, and you can see the rabbet cut, or the dado cut. That's actually a dado cut that we just made, and we did that on all of the pieces. The next thing I need to do now is cut this out. I'm going to be using this rabbeting bit to cut that hole, and the way that works is the bearing rides against the piece of wood at the top, and the cutter blades underneath cut that slot in there. And you can adjust these bearings, you can replace these bearings with smaller bearings or larger bearings, and depending on the size of the bearing is how wide that cut is. And then of course you raise it up and down. When it sits in the router, it sits like that. There's the collet. And you raise it up, raise the whole thing up and down, and that adjusts the height. Now I've installed the bit in the router table. The next thing we need to do is to isolate that bearing. And all that simply means is making the bearing the same distance as the fence. So we need to pull that out, lock the fence down there, and then we can just adjust, pivot the fence on that one, and lock that down. Now when we're doing a cut like this, we always do the cross grain first. because when we do that first, we will end up doing the long grain, and that will eliminate some of the tear out that we might otherwise have to sand out. So there's our first little box, and that's dry fit together. It's just being held together by friction, but it gives us an idea of what we're looking at. The next thing we need to do before we glue all this up is we need to mount, or we need to cut holes for the speakers, but we also, remember, we have some controls here, so we're going to need to make some holes. I took a few minutes with a piece of scrap that I had to make a template. In fact, I had to make a couple of them because the first one wasn't quite right. So I made a template, and I've double-sided it onto the plate, the face plate that I want, and now I'm just going to drill the holes. That. There they are. Nice. Okay. Well, we're almost ready to glue up our little speaker boxes. Now, the glue that I'm going to be using in this case is a 2-part 5-minute epoxy. Now, mixing 2-part epoxy just means putting I've got this on a scrap board here, and you put down a clump of glue, move that out of the light there, and you put another clump of hardener to go with it, about equal size, so equal portions of each. Then you just mix it well, and I'm just using, I just got a scrap piece of wood here that I'm using, because when this hardens, you can't really do anything with this. It's going to be that. It's just like a rock when it gets hard. So now that the cabinets are all glued up, I took a moment, and I just did this off camera. I glued a couple of strips in the back of each box and just cut a little square piece that will fit in, that will be the back. And I've done that on both sides. This one I've even cut out the holes for the connections for the wires. And there we are. Got our little speaker boxes all done. And I have to admit, that was a little bit more work than I expected. But I think it turned out nice. The next thing we need to do now is test them and see if they work. Well, I've plugged these speakers in. Let's see if we can get them to work. Our video on making the little speaker boxes. And you could use these for a computer, you could use them for an iPod or an iPad or a tablet. With the right adapter, you could even plug your phone into them because they're powered speakers. So if you want to listen to music, this is a different way of doing it. You know, you can't go out to a store and buy these. These are you know, something this deluxe. I guess I won't be happy until everything around me is made out of wood. So it's a fun little project. A little bit time consuming, but you don't need a whole lot of room, and you can use some pretty exotic woods because you don't use a lot of it. So I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and stick around to watch our next video.